Supreme Commander Vextal stood before the Emergency Council of the Unified Species, his iridescent scales dulled with exhaustion. The circular chamber, normally alive with the soft glow of holographic displays and quiet deliberation, now hummed with tension. Representatives from 17 spacefaring civilizations sat in terraced rings, their attention fixed on the veteran commander. "I come before you today, not as a warrior celebrating victory, but as a witness bearing a warning," Vextal began, his translator struggling to convey the gravity in his voice. 3 solar cycles ago, my fleet encountered what we believed to be a simple human mining operation in the Orion Arm. We expected a brief skirmish, perhaps some negotiation. Instead, we witnessed something that challenges everything we know about warfare. The commander gestured, and a holographic display materialized in the chamber center. It showed a modest collection of human ships clustered around an asteroid belt. Their fleet was inferior in every measurable way. Vextal continued, 12 ships against our 38. Outdated shield technology. Primitive weapon systems. By any tactical analysis, they should have surrendered immediately. A ripple of movement passed through the chamber as various species shifted in their seats. The Arcturian representative, a being of pure energy contained within a crystalline matrix, pulsed with curiosity. Yet they did not. No. Vextal's scales darkened with remembered tension. They did something unprecedented. Instead of retreating or surrendering, they drove their mining ships directly into the asteroid field. The hologram shifted, showing human vessels weaving between massive rocks with reckless precision. We assumed they were hiding, buying time for reinforcements. We were wrong. His voice dropped lower. They were preparing. The display changed again, showing the human ships systematically detonating specific asteroids, creating a cascade of debris that formed an expanding cloud of rock and ice. They turned the entire asteroid field into a weapon. But that wasn't the true surprise. Several council members leaned forward as the hologram revealed what happened next. The human ships, rather than fleeing the chaos they'd created, drove straight through the debris field, using the chaos as cover. Their vessels took horrific damage, but they kept coming. They knew their shields couldn't match ours, Vextal explained. So they simply decided shields didn't matter. They converted their mining lasers into makeshift weapons, channeling all power from their defensive systems into pure offensive capability. It was, he paused, searching for the right word, insane. The Hivemind representative, speaking through its drone, chittered in disbelief. Suicide tactics are not unknown in warfare. This wasn't suicide, Vextal corrected sharply. This was calculation. Pure, terrible calculation. They knew exactly how much damage their ships could take before breaking apart. They knew precisely how to use the debris field they created to fragment our formation. And they knew, he touched a control, and the hologram showed the final phase of the battle, that our superior shields meant nothing if we couldn't maneuver. The display revealed human ships, their hulls bleeding atmosphere and trailing debris, ramming through the gaps in the alien fleet's formation. Not to destroy, but to disable. Each impact was precisely calculated to knock out engines and weapon systems. In less than 2 hours, they had reduced my fleet to a collection of stranded vessels. No mass casualties, no wholesale destruction. Just 38 advanced warships floating helplessly in space, unable to fight or flee. The chamber erupted in murmured discussions. The Quantum Collective's representative, a shimmering cloud of interconnected particles, pulsed with concern. What was their demand for our ship's release? Vextal's scales shifted to a deep blue of remembered humiliation. They demanded nothing. They sent engineering teams to repair our critical systems, left enough fuel for each ship to reach the nearest friendly port, and departed. Their commander sent only one message. Next time, ask nicely to survey our territory. Silence fell over the chamber. The implications were clear. The humans hadn't just won a battle. They'd dismissed it as a minor inconvenience. The High Counselor, an ancient being from one of the founding species, spoke for the first time. You believe this encounter represents a larger threat? I believe, Vextal said carefully, that we have fundamentally misunderstood humans. We see their inferior technology and assume primitive thinking. We see their fragile bodies and assume physical weakness. We see their short lifespans and assume strategic short-sightedness. He deactivated the hologram, leaving the chamber in its natural light. But we're missing something crucial. Humans don't think like us. When we see an unwinnable scenario, we calculate losses and seek alternatives. When humans see an unwinnable scenario, they redefine the parameters of victory. They took a mining operation and turned it into a combat victory, he continued. They transformed a defensive position into an offensive weapon. Most importantly, they showed us mercy not out of weakness, but to send a message. They wanted us to know that they could have destroyed us, but chose not to. The High Counselor's ancient eyes narrowed. What do you propose? We must change how we approach humanity, Vextal said firmly. Not as primitives to be conquered or inferiors to be dominated, but as equals who think in ways we don't understand. They don't follow our rules of engagement not because they're uncivilized, but because they see possibilities we don't. He straightened to his full height, scales shifting to the formal patterns of absolute certainty. I've commanded fleets for 3 centuries. I've fought in 17 major campaigns. But I've never encountered a species that treats impossible situations as merely interesting puzzles to be solved. We must learn to treat humans not as enemies to be defeated, but as a force of nature to be understood. The chamber fell silent as the council absorbed his words. Finally, the High Counselor spoke again. You believe diplomatic engagement is possible. I believe it's essential, Vextal replied. But we must approach them with respect, not condescension. They've shown us they can defeat superior forces without destruction. Imagine what they could accomplish as allies instead of adversaries. As the council chamber erupted in discussion, Vextal stood quietly, remembering the message from the human commander. It hadn't been a threat or a boast. It had been an invitation to understand. And perhaps, he thought, that understanding would begin here, in this chamber, with his warning. Fleet Admiral Zakir of the Hegemony Defense Force watched the holographic display with growing unease. The blockade of the human colony world New Horizon had been in place for 30 days, cutting off all supplies and communications to the isolated settlement. By all tactical assessments, the human colonists should be approaching their breaking point. Instead, the Admiral's sensor officers reported increasingly bizarre energy readings from the planet's surface. Another anomaly detected. Admiral, reported Senior Analyst Mira, her crystalline form flickering with concern. The humans are somehow generating power signatures that don't match any known reactor configuration. Zakir's facial tentacles writhed in frustration. The blockade had been perfect. 300 ships forming an impenetrable net around the planet. No supplies in or out. The humans' fusion reactors should be running on fumes by now. Yet somehow, the colony's power output was increasing. Show me the latest surface scans, he ordered. The hologram shifted, revealing a thermal map of the main colony. Where there should have been signs of power failure and declining industrial activity, there were instead hot spots of intense energy production scattered throughout the settlement. More troubling were the massive heat signatures coming from what had been abandoned mining quarries. They're building something, Zakir muttered. But what are they using for power? His answer came 3 hours later, when the first tremor shook his flagship. Seismic activity detected. An officer shouted. Multiple epicenters around the colony. The holographic display erupted with new data as dozens of energy signatures burst from the planet's surface. But they weren't launches. They were erupting from deep underground, following the planet's natural fault lines. Impossible, Zakir whispered as understanding dawned. They've turned the planet's tectonic activity into a power source. The humans had spent their month of isolation drilling deep into the planet's crust, using their mining equipment to tap into the natural heat of the planet's core. They'd transformed their entire colony into a massive geothermal power plant. But that wasn't the worst of it. Multiple objects approaching the blockade, Mira reported. They appear to be. Admiral, they're using modified mining pods. Hundreds of them. The tactical display showed swarms of small vessels rising from the colony. They weren't military craft. They were repurposed mining equipment, each one trailing a strange crystalline structure behind it. Analysis of those structures, Zucker demanded. They appear to be. Mira's crystalline form pulsed with disbelief. They're artificial glaciers, sir. The humans have been using their excess geothermal power to freeze atmospheric moisture into massive ice structures. Zucker watched in horrified fascination as the swarm of mining pods maneuvered their frozen cargo into precise positions around the planet. The humans had created an artificial asteroid field, but one made of ice rather than rock. Sir, Mira's voice was urgent now. The ice structures. They're not just frozen water. They're laced with metals and minerals from the mining quarries. They're conducting energy. The Admiral's blood ran cold as he realized what they'd done. The humans hadn't just created obstacles. They'd built a planet-scale energy distribution network. Each ice structure was a combination of frozen water and conductive materials, carefully positioned to create. It's a weapon, he breathed. They've turned the entire blockade zone into a giant capacitor. Before he could order evasive action, arcs of energy began jumping between the ice structures. The human mining pods retreated quickly, leaving behind their carefully positioned network. Energy from the colony's improvised geothermal plants surged through the conductive ice formations, creating a web of artificial lightning that played havoc with shield systems and sensor arrays. Multiple ships reporting shield failures. An officer called out. The energy discharges are creating resonance patterns that. The report was cut off as a massive surge of power rippled through the ice network. Ships throughout the blockade formation suddenly found their shields overloaded, their systems scrambled by the artificial electromagnetic storm the humans had created. They turned the entire theater of operations into a weapon, Zucker realized. Not to destroy us, but to. His words trailed off as new contacts appeared on the few sensors still functioning. Ships were emerging from jump space, but not military vessels. They were civilian craft, cargo haulers, passenger liners, even private yachts. The humans had called in every non-military ship in range. Message from the colony, Mira reported. Text only. It reads, "Your blockade is impressive, but we've decided to reorganize local space. Feel free to stay and watch. Mind the lightning." Zucker watched helplessly as the civilian ships began expertly navigating through gaps in his now disrupted blockade formation. The humans hadn't tried to break his military containment. They'd simply changed the entire battlefield into an environment where military ships were at a disadvantage. Orders. Admiral. Mira asked quietly. Zucker stared at the display, watching as more civilian ships slipped through his supposedly impenetrable blockade. His military vessels, designed for combat in normal space, were paralyzed by the artificial electromagnetic storm. Meanwhile, civilian ships, with their more flexible operating parameters and redundant systems, moved freely through the chaos. "Send word to High Command," he said finally. "Tell them." He paused, remembering the warning that had been delivered to the Council. "Tell them the humans don't acknowledge the concept of being trapped. They just rewrite the rules of their environment until they're no longer contained." As his message was transmitted, Zucker watched the civilian ships complete their relief operation. Not a single shot had been fired. Not one military vessel had been destroyed. The humans had simply turned his perfect blockade into an elaborate light show, demonstrating that superiority in conventional military power meant nothing to a species that refused to fight conventionally. The humans had been cornered, trapped, and isolated, and in response, they had casually reshaped the laws of physics in their local space rather than admit defeat. Zucker felt a new emotion as he ordered his ships to withdraw. not fear of human military might, but awed at their sheer audacity. They hadn't defeated his blockade. They'd simply decided that the space he was blocking belonged to them, and rearranged reality accordingly. Chief Research Director Nilax reviewed the latest data streams from the observation chambers, her compound eyes reflecting the soft glow of multiple displays. The research station, hidden in a pocket of subspace, housed the Galactic Concordat's most ambitious study yet, Project Understanding, an attempt to comprehend human resilience through controlled observation. The subjects, 12 human soldiers captured during various engagements, had been placed in what should have been impossible survival scenarios. Instead of breaking, they were thriving in ways that defied scientific explanation. "Show me Chamber 7 again," she instructed her assistant, Corell. The holographic display expanded, revealing a vast artificial environment designed to test human adaptation to extreme conditions. Inside, 2 human soldiers had been surviving for 3 months in what was supposed to be a lethal atmosphere. Instead of dying, they had somehow altered their own biology. Remarkable. Corell chittered, his antennae twitching with excitement. They've developed specialized bacterial colonies in their lung tissue that filter the toxic elements from the air. They're essentially growing their own organic rebreathers, without any genetic engineering technology, Nilax added. Pure biological adaptation driven by survival necessity. She moved to another display. And Chamber 3. The image shifted to show 3 humans who had been placed in a gravity well twice Earth normal. The scientists had expected to observe the deterioration of their musculoskeletal system. Instead, after initial difficulty, the humans had developed new walking techniques, their bodies naturally restructuring muscle and bone density to compensate. They don't just survive, Corell noted. They optimize. Look at their movement patterns now. They're actually more efficient in high gravity than they were in standard conditions. Nilax clicked her mandibles thoughtfully. Show me the social experiment chambers. The display changed again, showing multiple environments where humans had been placed in isolation. But the results weren't what anyone had predicted. Instead of psychological deterioration, the subjects had created complex systems of communication using everything from tapping codes to manipulating their own biorhythms to send signals between chambers. They've developed their own language, Corell observed. Not just simple communication. They've created an entirely new linguistic framework based on environmental manipulation. Yes, Nilax said softly. But that's not what concerns me. Look at the pattern analysis. She brought up a new overlay, showing data streams from all chambers simultaneously. Complex mathematical patterns emerge, revealing that the seemingly random activities of all 12 subjects, spread across different environments, were actually synchronized. They're coordinating, she realized, across sealed chambers, through subspace barriers, without any direct contact. They've turned our entire facility into a communication network. Corell's antennae drooped with sudden worry. But that's impossible. The chambers are completely isolated. Are they? Nilax enlarged one data stream. Look at their cellular activity. They're using their own biological processes to detect and respond to quantum fluctuations in subspace. They've turned their bodies into organic quantum sensors. A warning signal flashed on one of the displays. In Chamber 9, the human subjects had begun what appeared to be a simple exercise routine. But when overlaid with data from the other chambers, it became clear they were generating specific vibrational patterns. They're not just communicating, Nilax whispered. They're mapping our facility. Every movement, every biological change, every adaptation. It's all part of a larger pattern. Corell moved to another console, his limbs working rapidly. Director, I'm detecting unusual energy signatures throughout the station. The humans, their cellular activities are somehow resonating with our containment fields. Nilax felt a chill run through her exoskeleton as she realized what was happening. They're not test subjects analyzing their environments, she said. We're test subjects. They've turned our entire experiment into their own research project. The warning signals multiplied as more systems began reporting anomalies. The humans hadn't tried to escape their chambers. They'd simply expanded their definition of their environment to include the entire facility. Their biological adaptations weren't just survival mechanisms. They were tools for understanding and manipulating the very fabric of subspace their prison was built from. "Shut down all chambers," Nihilax ordered. "Full containment protocols." But it was too late. The humans had already learned enough about the quantum structure of their prison. In perfect synchronization, all 12 subjects entered what appeared to be a meditative state. Their cellular activities, now precisely tuned to the facility's subspace frequency, began causing cascading fluctuations throughout the station. "Remarkable," Krell whispered, even as emergency alerts blared. "They've weaponized their own adaptation process. Every change we forced them to make, they turned into a tool for understanding our technology." Nihilax watched as the containment fields began to fail, not through any physical breach, but through subtle manipulations of subspace itself. The humans hadn't fought against their prison. They'd simply learned its fundamental laws so thoroughly that they could rewrite them. "Send word to the Concordat," she said, mandibles clicking rapidly. "Tell them we've gravely misunderstood the human capacity for adaptation. We thought we were studying their ability to survive. Instead, they were studying our methods of containment." As the facility's systems continued to fail, Nihilax realized that the humans hadn't just escaped. They had evolved beyond the very concept of containment. They had turned an experiment in survival into a masterclass in transcendence. The last thing she saw before emergency protocols initiated was all 12 humans, still in their meditative poses, smiling slightly. They hadn't fought their way out. They had simply grown beyond the boundaries their captors had tried to impose. Scientific curiosity overcame her fear as she understood the true lesson. Humans didn't break out of boxes. They evolved until boxes became meaningless. Grand Strategist Ixal of the Combined Fleet stood before the massive strategic display, watching as the largest military operation in galactic history unfolded. 7,000 ships across 15 species had launched simultaneous attacks on 23 human worlds. The plan was perfect. Overwhelm humanity's capacity to respond with sheer scale. "Status report," he commanded, his crystalline form pulsing with anticipated victory. "All targets engaged," his second, Commander Ven, reported. "Human defensive forces are overwhelmed at multiple points." However, she hesitated. "Speak freely, Commander. They're not responding according to any known tactical doctrine. Instead of reinforcing their defensive lines, they're abandoning them entirely." Ixal's crystalline structure flickered with concern. The humans were falling back from every engagement, leaving behind their orbital platforms, their defense stations, even their civilian infrastructure. It wasn't a retreat. It was too organized, too purposeful. "Show me their movement patterns," he ordered. The strategic display shifted, revealing the flow of human forces across multiple star systems. What at first appeared to be chaos slowly resolved into something else, a pattern so vast it had been invisible until viewed across multiple systems simultaneously. "They're not retreating," Ixal realized with growing unease. "They're consolidating. Every ship, every station, every piece of infrastructure they've abandoned. They're all moving in coordinated patterns." New data streams poured in as the human response became clearer. They weren't just moving military assets. They were repositioning entire populations, industrial complexes, even asteroid mining operations. Every piece of human civilization across 23 worlds was flowing like a choreographed dance. "Sir," Ven's voice carried an edge of worry. "We're detecting massive energy signatures. The humans are. They're moving their planets." "What?" Ixal's crystalline form crackled with disbelief. The display confirmed it. Using technology that hadn't existed days ago, the humans were literally shifting the orbits of their colonies. Planetary engines of impossible scale had appeared, constructed from the very infrastructure they'd seen to abandon. "This is why they pulled back their forces," Ixal understood suddenly. They weren't retreating from our attack. They were clearing space for something bigger. The human worlds were moving into new configurations, their orbits carefully calculated to create gravitational resonance patterns. What had been separate colonies were becoming something else, a vast, interconnected system where planets themselves served as components in a machine that encompassed entire solar systems. "Message incoming," Ven announced. From the human commander. The message was brief. "Thank you for the motivation to implement Project Unity ahead of schedule. Please stand by for demonstration." Before Ixal could respond, the energy readings from the human systems spiked dramatically. The relocated planets, now precisely positioned, began generating overlapping gravitational fields. Space itself seemed to twist as 23 worlds, hundreds of space stations, and millions of ships synchronized into a single vast organism. "Impossible," Ven whispered. "They turned their entire civilization into a weapon." The human worlds pulsed with energy, each planet a node in a network that transcended normal space. Their defensive strategy wasn't about protecting individual worlds. It was about achieving a level of coordination that transformed their entire sphere of influence into a single unified entity. "All ships, break engagement," Ixal ordered, but it was too late. The human systems rippled with coherent energy waves, the carefully positioned planets creating gravitational lenses that focused their combined power. Ships caught in the effect found their weapons useless, their drives paralyzed by fundamental alterations in local space-time. They didn't just advance their technology, Ixal realized. They evolved their entire civilization. Every defeat, every setback, every loss, they used it all as catalyst for transformation. The combined fleet, largest military force ever assembled, found itself trapped in spaces between spaces, caught in a web of altered physics that humanity had woven from the very fabric of their colonies. They hadn't fought the invasion. They had transcended the very concept of conventional warfare. "Another message," Ven reported, her voice quiet with awe. "Text only. This was never about winning battles. It was about showing you why trying to break humanity is a fundamental error. We don't break, we transform. Every pressure point becomes a pivot for evolution. Thank you for helping us demonstrate this principle." Ixal watched as his mighty fleet hung helpless in space, not destroyed or defeated, but simply rendered irrelevant by humanity's leap beyond traditional concepts of warfare. They had turned an existential threat into an opportunity for species-wide transcendence. "Send word to command," he said finally. "Tell them." He paused, searching for words to describe what he'd witnessed. "Tell them humanity doesn't have a breaking point. They have transformation points, and we just help them reach one." As the message was sent, Ixal understood the true magnitude of their miscalculation. They had tried to break humanity by forcing them to fight on multiple fronts. Instead, they had given humanity a reason to unify in ways that redefined what was possible for a civilization. The humans hadn't just survived. They had used the pressure of invasion to catalyze an evolutionary leap that transformed their entire society into something beyond conventional understanding. They had proven that their greatest strength wasn't in their ability to fight, but in their capacity to transform crisis into transcendence.